Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. It's Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023. The Bitcoin block height is 804397, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Today's episode is the first episode of Bitcoin Talk, where I talk about Bitcoin and many other things with my guest. Today, that guest is Jordan Schachtel. Jordan is the publisher of the Dossier, and he's a Bitcoiner. You can find all Jordan's social media links in the show notes. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. I am joined today by Jordan Schachtel. Jordan is the publisher of the Dossier, and he is also a Bitcoiner. So, Jordan, thank you for joining me today. I'm glad we got a chance to talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Walker. And I love the name, The Bitcoin Podcast, because obviously that means it's better than any other podcast that discusses Bitcoin, because this is the official Bitcoin podcast. So it's an honor to be on the number one Bitcoin podcast.
Absolutely. And, I decided, obviously it's a bit douchey to call it that, right? But I honestly got the idea. I went to University of Wisconsin, and Ohio State at some point started calling themselves the Ohio State. And I was like, God, that's so annoying. But now I'm like, oh, it's annoying in a funny way to me at this point. So I'm glad you're happy to be on the Bitcoin Podcast, not just another fucking Bitcoin podcast, but the Bitcoin Podcast.
No, I really like the name, and it's interesting because Bitcoin is not a corporation, so really anyone can call themselves whatever in reference to Bitcoin. You call yourself the CEO of Bitcoin. You can say, I am the host of the best, the number one Bitcoin podcast. And it's fine. So I like it. It's up to the audience to determine the truth. And I think that they will agree. This is probably the best Bitcoin podcast out there, even though you just started.
Yeah, we'll leave it up to the consensus of the plebs, whatever they decide. And shockingly, bitcoinpodcast.net was available, not .com. I'm not sure who's using it, but it's idle. So anytime you can squat on a good domain, it's like, why not, right? And speaking of good domains, so you are the publisher at dossier.today. URL is correct there?
Yeah, dossier.com was like $1 million. So I went with the $2 variation, dossier.today. And I bought, the Dossier is affiliated with Substack, but, Twitter is my biggest platform, have like 260 something thousand followers on there. So I use that to kind of send my followers and readers to the Substack. But since we've moved over to Twitter 2.0, we've had this thing where the Substack links are getting the images don't populate because something in the code of Twitter now stops them from populating. So what you have to do as a Substacker now is you need to buy a new domain to redirect to. So it is a Substack, but the URL is now dossier.today, which I like, and $2 a year. So how can you beat that?
I mean, that's a great deal. I did notice that with the, Elon's latest iteration of, I guess we have to call it X now. I'm just still going to keep calling it Twitter. It's so deep in my brain that I can't get rid of that. It's Twitter and their tweets, not X and Zeets or whatever it is. But the amount of suppression that any sort of external link gets is just absurd. Even if it's not a direct Substack link, for example, anything that's not native Twitter content just seems to be pushed way, way down, which I guess he's trying to turn it into the everything platform, on the road to a WeChat style type of thing. I don't know if that is his end goal. It kind of seems like it, but it's kind of a shame because it makes sharing anything on Twitter okay, you can now if you have a paid subscription, Twitter Blue or X Black or whatever they're going to call it now. You can upload really long videos and everything. But I feel in terms of content itself, the platform still has a long ways to go before it is able to totally get rid of external links. Cause that's for a lot of people, they want to direct people elsewhere. There isn't that that desire to post everything on there. Like
Yeah.
maybe I know a lot of filmmakers who it's like, I want people to go to my YouTube, but I can't post the direct YouTube link in the first post because it won't get any sort of traction. So have you seen, you're at, I think, getting close to 50,000 subscribers at this point today, right? So I think I saw like 45, 46, something like that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Did you see like a big downturn when Elon took over in terms of, because you started the Dossier in, was it 2021?
I believe it was July 2020 or 2021, but it's been a
Okay.
couple of years. And
Yeah.
the growth on the free side is up only, and it was growing very fast. And because my biggest platform is Twitter, and my biggest platform is Twitter, by the way, I'll give a little bit of credit to Elon, even though most of it was grown during the old regime where I had to be careful what I said, like kind of like being in like a Soviet style organization where you have to kind of like mock the regime, but very carefully.
Yeah.
And I managed not to get banned on old Twitter. I was locked out a bunch of times, but my audience grew. I didn't even bother starting like a Facebook or like Insta or TikTok page about these issues that I was talking about, because what I was reporting on, was antithetical to all the corporate press and, Western government narratives that were populating the world. And, nobody wanted to hear it, especially in these, in Zuckerberg world and elsewhere. So Twitter was growing. I think Jack Dorsey kind of like at the end of his tenure basically gave up at some point. And that's probably why he departed to work on Bitcoin and other things and, supporting Nostr and whatnot. Um, but yeah, with Substack, it was growing very fast. And then the Elon crackdown came. And it's interesting you mentioned that, he's kind of trying to turn it into this like WeChat thing, because I don't know if you noticed, but even like if you don't have a Twitter account now, you actually can't access like anything that's on Twitter. Like if you just do like an incognito window search for someone's Twitter handle, like it's completely closed off. So, there's definitely some downsides to that too. It kind of reminds me of like the conversations that are going on in the Bitcoin space, where a lot of people are talking about, paying like small amounts in Lightning to access websites. And I think that that's a potential for the future. But today, it's very difficult, like basically telling everyone that like you're only going to be posting on Nostr now. There's disadvantages to that too. So, but I think that, Twitter is really a mixed bag right now. Unfortunately, they seem to be clashing heads with Substack. I don't know who's telling the truth, but, Elon says they're basically stealing whatever sensitive information. So, and on the Substack side, they said they're not doing any of that. So I'm not really sure what's happening, but unfortunately, a lot of the Substackers who really came to Substack for the most part to publish free of censorship devices. Of course, Substack isn't free from being pressured. They have to rely on Stripe to process payments. So there's a lot of attack vectors there, and of course it's centralized and everything. But Substack's been really good. I think 100% record in promoting at least lawful speech.
Right.
So I really like Substack, and I hope that I could appeal to the leadership at X.com to at least get along with them, because if you claim to support, you want, if you, I get that Twitter needs to make money like every other corporation that wants to exist, but if you claim that free speech is so important to your set of top principles, then you should probably find a way to allow for independent journalists to promote their own work on your platform.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, so Elon is obviously somebody who is very like publicly facing, you rah rah free speech. Even recently he's said they're doing away with the block button, right, to go to just like a mute only model, but where anyone you have muted, unlike a block, that person could still reply to you, which is personally like, again, just my personal opinion. I think that's fine. Like on Nostr, there is no such thing as a block. You can just mute it so you don't ever see that person's anything that person posts. which is fine. Like, I don't care if you see what I post. I just don't want to see you in my feed. And especially if it's like spam, some sort of bot, like, okay, just mute that. I don't need to see it. But I know a lot of people, I think especially like very big accounts got a bit ticked off about the whole no block thing. But then I also, who's the woman that Elon now has in charge?
Yacarino, Linda
Yeah,
Yacarino. She's like an
I,
advertising executive.
yeah, I saw you had a tweet, maybe it was today or the other day, just being like, she's basically got some Fauci vibes to her, like
Yeah,
the
and
way that
she
like,
has that, as a someone who grew up in the New York City metro area, I identified the accent pretty quickly. So she even sounds like him in a way. So it is mysterious in that sense.
well, it's funny too because you've got somebody again like Elon, who's the figurehead of it all. But obviously now he runs a number of companies. He's not trying to handle as much of the day to day, so he brings in someone like this. And you've seen some of the things she said. What's the one? Lawful but awful is how she characterized certain speech, which is like, okay, interesting. Again, like if it's lawful and you promote free speech, you would think that any speech that is legal, like as long as you're not inciting violence, would be something that's okay. But again, I feel like as much as he's tried to say that this will be this bastion for free speech, it's going to end up getting itself into the category of, okay, we already know that he was pressured by the Turkish government during the last
Hmm.
election cycle there over the summer. We can assume that there have been other governments who have been able to successfully exert pressure on him. And this kind of comes back to the problem of, again, like, okay, he's still running a company in the United States of America. Now, whether or not he caves to foreign governments, okay, that's a different story. One could make the argument that, hey, it's his company. Like, he bought it, he owns it, he can do whatever he wants with it. At the same time, it's like, well, therein lies the problem, right? And like,
Hmm.
that's where protocols like Nostr, I think, are super powerful because there's no throat to choke. There's no head to cut off. There's nobody to threaten. It's like a hydra from Greek mythology. You can cut off one head, two more grow in its place. But by the same token, those sort of organic grassroots movements tend to take a little while to get going. And Twitter, now X, has been established for a long time. I've very much enjoyed the platform for a very long time, but I'm interested to see where it goes. And I don't know. It seems to me I've seen a lot of arguments that, like, okay, he's just implementing all of the blue checks and then all the different layers of, okay, yeah, he's going to pay you out, but now you're KYC'd, and now soon you'll need to show a government ID if you want to prove you're a real person. He's not doing the WorldCoin scanning your eyeballs thing, but he's requiring an ID at some point. Seen some screenshots of that some people leaked. But like, do you think that is his goal to transition X into some sort of a westernized WeChat where it's your everything app, like it's your payments app? We already know, he was, an investor and founder or co-founder of PayPal. I don't know how much the actual work he did and how much of the just investment he did. I can't speak to that, but
Hmm.
he clearly has his eye on the payment side. I don't know if he's going to launch like his own X coin stable coin. Like, I'd be interested to see, as somebody who is an avid user of the platform with a lot of success, but also frustration, where do you see him starting to take this company and this platform, which is basically the de facto town hall? Like it or not, Twitter is still the virtual town hall that we have. And there are other options, but still it's probably the best one available.
Yeah, yeah. Twitter is still where the conversation happens. As much as like the corporate media is frustrated by that, they tried to do the Threads launch with Zuckerberg, and that
Oh,
basically flamed out within a week because it was like NPC, follow Shaq and some like random celebrities, boring hot takes that are very politically correct. So people,
AOC was on there immediately.
yes.
Like within a second, AOC was just going off on there. It was great.
I thought it was funny that they tried Mastodon, and Mastodon's like super complicated, and then they just like gave up on Mastodon. But it's interesting to see the journey of the NPC and where they end up. But I think with like Elon and his vision with Twitter, definitely you see with a lot of these great minds, undoubtedly he's invented some amazing products. Tesla, I'm a former Tesla owner, love the car. SpaceX, amazing company, doing a lot of amazing things. Brilliant mind, undoubtedly. But just because you're a brilliant person doesn't mean that you could come up with some bad ideas. Like I was just, for instance, like the movie Oppenheimer just came out, so it might be on people's radar. And I'm sure if you saw it, you caught in the movie. I think there was a brief mention that Oppenheimer, after he successfully led the team that built the bomb, he and his colleagues, who were very much left wing in orientation, that's kind of besides the point. They thought that a kind of like one world government UN entity would be the best, handler for a nuclear device. And for me, that's like the worst possible idea imaginable. And these were, of course, probably the most brilliant theoretical physicists that have ever come to, grace our planet. And they had this awful, awful geopolitical idea. So with Elon, I see a very similar circumstance happening, trying to create this everything app and then thinking in his mind that he's going to be able to make it, somehow privacy oriented too. Like there's just no way, unless he plans on, becoming or ruling some type of very powerful country with trillions of dollars in his possession. I mean, he's the most, successful entrepreneur perhaps of all time. But this would definitely be a level up. He does not control the government. He's still, as you said, there's a lot of influences both from the East and the West onto his brands. And there's just, to me, there's no way you can create a centralized entity. Like the whole lesson, half the importance of the discovery of Bitcoin is that, there's no, one distributor.
Right.
And I think what you see with Elon is just like kind of this naive / like very drunken idealistic behavior and trying to create an everything app. And I know that, reading on, the history of PayPal and what he's done in the payments processing space is that he's tried to kind of do this before. And this idea was probably like a little ahead of its time in terms of the technology that was available. So now he's trying to do it again by acquiring X and trying to move everyone onto, I guess, a homegrown payment system. But of course, like, what the deal is. If you're trying to create your own currency, God forbid, that's going to compete with the dollar and you're the man in charge, it's just such an easy attack vector if you're going to create X coin backed by SpaceX reserves or what. It just doesn't make sense to me. I think that I think that he was right to try to chart a new course for Twitter /X because Twitter was never a profitable company. So I get that critique, but turning it into the everything app is very bold, to say the least. And I definitely have a lot of concerns about that.
Yeah, it's funny because you brought up like the NPC journey on to, let's say, other alternative social media, and like leaving Mastodon aside, the ones where I saw kind of just interesting things happening, like Nostr kind of came onto the scene in like really came into people's consciousness in probably December. Like it had been around for Fiat Joff had been working on it for a couple of years before that, but it was mainly a lot of, like hardcore devs, like doing the real work, tinkering on this thing, building it. But it kind of came into the pseudo mainstream in December, right? And that's when I first started using it. I'd heard about it like 6 months before because I'm a slight nerd and was reading Fiat Joff's GitHub to find some Lightning implementation he had done. And I was like, oh, Nostr, like interesting, alternative social media. Okay. Anyway, next, like, let me find what I was looking for. Like disregarded it. Like I disregarded Bitcoin the first few times I heard about it. But it really like had quite a explosion there for a while, and still is growing. But that was also a couple months before Blue Sky launched. Like it kind of sucked for Blue Sky, right? Because they'd had this like big team, like a lot more coordinated, a lot of funding from Dorsey on that. And like, to his credit, I think it's great that he funds like a lot of different development. He's not like picking a winner. He's just saying, you're building this, decentralized technology. Okay, I've made a lot of money and I want to put that towards people who are building freedom tech. Great. But Blue Sky, I got it one of those invite codes and I got on there once it launched. And I noticed that again, it was like a lot of the like politicians and sort of more blue pilled folks were like on there immediately. And the first conversations you'd see on there were like people getting offended by something and trying to figure out how they could kick kick the person who had offended them off of this protocol, not a platform, but off this protocol, and just getting really bent out of shape about it. And again, like right away, you saw like the AOCs and the kind of like I don't even want to call the journalists mainstream. I'll call them legacy journalists because they're not the mainstream anymore. They're the legacy. You saw a lot of them get on there and like, okay, interesting. And I saw that sort of same behavior mirrored in Threads, where it was like Blue Sky is to Threads as Nostr is to Twitter in a way, where on Nostr, like you had that early Twitter vibe where it was just kind of like free for all. But somehow like nobody's too concerned with, labeling each other Nazis and kicking each other off of this thing. And it's interesting to like, maybe it's because there wasn't anyone in charge. You have that freedom where you can say whatever you want. And when you have that freedom, people often don't take undue advantage of it. It's like when they're given the freedom to act how they want, they may surprise you and act a little bit better than you think. But when you impose these arbitrary walls on them, whether it be on Threads, whether it be on Twitter or X or Facebook. I mean, Facebook, I haven't used Facebook in years. I don't even know what the content moderation is on there these days. But you find that people, if there's a wall, people want to push back against it. When it's an open field, people are just kind of hanging out. And I think that's sort of a beautiful thing. I'm interested to see where it goes. We've got to get you back using Nostr again. I know you had, remember you joined up. You were active for a little while, but you obviously have like an audience that is almost as large. Like your Twitter audience is almost as large as like all the active users on Nostr. So for you, it's like, okay, you're going to go where the people are because that's where your message is going to get traction. So I'll be interested to see how the kind of protocol evolves and if we see more people running away from the centralized social media and toward the more decentralized option. But it takes time. I don't know.
Yeah, there's this thing about like, everyone in their head wants to be the hero who's the first person through the door. But it's like, in terms of success, it's generally not a good idea to be the first guy through the door because that guy gets, their head taken off. So it's kind of like, so for me, it's like, I'm like sitting back, seeing how Nostr's doing. And I do want, like, I do kind of like lurk a little bit on the conversation. I'm still kind of figuring out I'm very familiar with Twitter, but I'm still kind of figuring out the features of Nostr. And it does seem interesting to me. Like, I logged in the other day after being offline, off the app for maybe like a month, and it did seem to improve like the speed, and people were posting a lot more photos and stuff. So I thought that was interesting. And I know that, there's a lot of Bitcoiners that are super passionate about it. Yeah, I just wonder, as we're kind of like in this time where, I think the price action of Bitcoin ultimately like recruits more people into Bitcoin. And since we've been moving sideways for such a long time, and that the Bitcoin community seems to be the biggest community at Nostr, or if not like the only major
it's diversifying out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that like for Nostr, I think for me, the goal is to see like success is like a bunch of randos from some type of like niche community just show up there and you're like, holy shit, I think we might be onto something. And I think that's when Nostr explodes. Like I think that like, Bitcoin, I'm a believer in the number go up technology stuff. But I think that like when people of other interests start to like randomly show up, I think that's like a key indicator that the protocol is really working. So it should be interesting. But yeah, like I'm definitely you've convinced me to double down, and I will try to spend more time in there and try to engage people.
Well,
After our conversation, I'll actually tweet out my public key, and that'll get some more Bitcoiners or Nostr people onto my handle. So maybe I'll engage with them some more. But I
you know,
appreciate it.
I'm glad to hear that, because I'm also thinking, like, for someone like you who is, let's say you're often sharing some inconvenient truths
Mhm.
that are definitely going against the legacy narratives. And so far, so good on Substack, right? Like, you haven't have had any issues with censorship on there to this point, right?
No, not even a mention. I think what Substack. My issue with Substack is that basically the executives that run the show there know that most people who kind of like built a decent sized audience there came at it from like this dissident framework. I don't want to call it like right versus left, but like anti-establishment.
Yeah.
And it seems that their marketing and advertising, they're trying to bring more establishment voices into the fold, which kind of annoys me. But as long as they give me a platform, I'm not so happy with the percentage they take because I feel like they're not doing as much of the legwork on the back end that they used to.
What
But
do
I've
they
already built
take?
up an audience. Sorry.
What's their cut on Substack?
So, so Stripe takes a little less than 10%, I think. And I want to say Substack also takes around 10 to 12%.
So
Well,
that's a
Substack, Stripe might be lower than that. I think they're like five to. I think overall it's around 15%
okay.
total between the
Okay.
two.
But
But
it's
Substack,
a decent chunk. Like, it's a
yeah,
good chunk of their
Substack,
revenue.
they're trying to they're trying to innovate in all kinds of ways in how to boost subscribers, but I think they kind of like overexposed the website to trying to get everyone to build a newsletter, and I guess that's good for business, but it kind of like when you go to they have this thing called Notes now, which I don't really use too much, but it seems that they're just like they're finding so many ways to like cross pollinate the newsletters. And I get a lot of requests from people with other Substacks, like, "Hey, can you repost mine?" And like for me, I want to kind of like protect, like, I don't want to offend these people, but I kind of want to like protect my email list. Like I don't know about you, but I like hate it when I get a random unsolicited email from some like political entity or some newsletter that I didn't subscribe to. So I feel like reposting, which Substack encourages you to do, I don't really like just sending my audience someone else's work because they subscribe to my work. They can also
Right.
subscribe to their work too. So I try to keep it like more in house, and I think that kind of limits the growth of my newsletter. But I'd rather do that and kind of like stay true with the audience. It's kind of part of the brand. So I think they appreciate that.
I mean, absolutely. Like, anytime I get some sort of unsolicited email where I'm like, I didn't sign up for this, my first thought is, okay, like, which one of you fuckers sold my email to somebody else? Like, I know that somebody sold my email. Who was it? But the reason that I ask about censorship on Substack, and I'm glad to hear that that hasn't happened for you yet, and hopefully will not, but I say yet just to leave the future open, is because, things, I don't think right now that we're trending in a direction of, at least from the state level, we're not trending in a direction of decreased presence of the state and increased liberty. There are a lot of tools that people are building that are from the bottom up that are helping us hopefully push back against that top down state control apparatus. But in general, it's like, especially we're getting into election season, right? And things, I feel like the line becomes even more fine from the state's perspective once you're into that election year of what is it okay to say and what's it not okay to say, and what's going to be termed misinformation or disinformation. And so again, to bring it back to Noster, that could be a really interesting way for you to at least have an alternate distribution mechanism. Like, there's a number of tools right now, like abla.news is one where you can publish, and it's basically it's like a blog builder, but on Noster, and you can publish this long form content, all formatted how you want. but it's going to be broadcast to dozens of relays. And unless like every single relay decides to censor you, which why would they, you've at least got something that is outside of the platform world and in the protocol world, so that if they start ripping your stuff off of Substack, let's hope they don't, but at least you've got some sort of a backup there. So that could be a nice avenue for you. And again, not having, because you mentioned, just I asked about the fees because I was curious, and 15% is like, you're working really hard for this. Obviously they're providing a service, but that's a big chunk. And then, you think about Bitcoin on Nostr, and it's like, okay, there's no middlemen there. Like that's just you taking directly from your audience, or I should say your audience giving directly to you. So I think that's an interesting angle for you to explore. And I think that we're going to see a lot more people who are publishing information that could be, let's say, against the state's interests migrate to Nostr. At least I hope we do. And I think we're seeing some of it already. But with that, I'd love to kind of transition to a little bit of just your background, kind of how you got started with the Dossier, because you're one of these voices. Both myself and Carl have been following you for a couple of years now. And I think it was like during COVID that and the kind of lockdown eras that we both like found you on Twitter and we're like, oh, this guy's like, he's saying some shit I like. And you started publishing the Dossier, but you've always, at least that I've seen, you've been somebody who, I don't know what your technical political affiliation would be, but you seem to call things out on both sides of the aisle pretty well. Like I've seen you go head to head with some diehard Trumpers and with some diehard Biden fans, if there are any that are truly diehard. But you're kind of pushing back against the legacy narratives in general. So kind of what is your background that brought you to start the Dossier? I know you were in DC for a while, but can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like kind of what brought you to start it, and like what in your background has kind of prepared you for this role that you found yourself in now?
Yes. So basically, when I went to college at a small liberal arts school in New Jersey called Monmouth, I just like didn't know what I wanted to major in, and this is kind of where it started. That I was just like interested in learning about the world always. So ended up majoring in international affairs and went to grad school in DC for that basically same degree for my master's. And I was kind of like a very, I would say like an establishment Republican oriented politically person, and thought I was very nationalistic, patriotic, and wanted to serve my country. So after grad school, I wanted to become probably a member of a 3-letter agency. So I was like way off course here. Like, I thought I loved freedom and liberty and stuff, and, totally head in the sand, propagandized by everything, by the Uniparty for sure. And then kind of like Donald, at this time I'm working, coincidentally, I was writing a few papers in grad school and published them, and, some media outlets took interest, and I kind of just got like sucked into right-wing media world, published basically every outlet you can imagine there, and was on staff at a couple places like Breitbart and The Blaze. So I'm doing that for a while, and still like, I have this master's degree in national security and international affairs, and I'm like interviewing with the feds. And so like living in these like two parallel worlds. Donald Trump gets elected, and like all this crazy stuff starts happening, and it kind of like forces me to revisit my worldview, because it's the first time in my lifetime, I'm only in my early 30s, but where there was actually like an anti-establishment candidate that came to office, and I saw the wrath of the deep state very close up firsthand. And I was like, okay, I don't really want to be a part of that anymore. So my degree is a waste, but it came in handy during the COVID times. So I'm still kind of like working for Right of Center Media, And, I've always wanted to establish my own independent operation because I think that space is very limited, and the contracts are awful. There's all kinds of nonsense that I could go into forever there. So I always wanted to start my own thing. Fast forward to late 2019, early 2020, and I start reading about this coronavirus stuff, and I see that I like to read kind of like the source material, and at this time I'm already like kind of slightly based. I am pretty much a Bitcoiner at this point, like gotten away from my shitcoining phase, so like pretty red pilled, and I and orange pilled at the same time. And I'm reading all this stuff about proper pandemic preparedness from like the WHO, from the CDC, what's going on in China, knowing with my background, because I covered international affairs in the media space, that, the structure of the Chinese government to be pretty suspicious of the press releases coming from the Communist Party of China. And like nothing made sense to me. Nothing they were doing was part of any of this original pandemic preparedness guidance at all. So it was all really weird to me. And I started to question the narrative. And then like I was shocked by the human behavior that came thereafter that was directed towards me. Because like as soon as I was saying this stuff, they're like, how dare you? Like you're basically a bioterrorist if you're not adhering to the narrative. And a lot of people were scared at this time. And for me, I was pretty freaked out for a couple of weeks, and then like the more I read about it, I was just like, this is nonsense. Like there's nothing really to be fearful of. And then I'm sure you can relate to like the similar situation of kind of feeling. I probably started following you and Carla maybe like 2021, and there was like this sense, I think, among a lot of us where it's like, we're fucked. Like this is pretty hopeless for a while, but like hopefully we're gonna awaken some minds, because like I remember, I'm a big mixed martial arts fan, and a jiu-jitsu practitioner, and I like love watching UFC. And I remember Dana White was like the first big, was leading the first big sports league to kind of try to get back open and try to have fights. And I remember he tried to host something in California in the early COVID days. And this is when I really knew we were screwed. You had American politicians being like, wow, that's like really insensitive that you're trying to have entertainment. Like this is a somber year. And it's like a somber year. And at this time I'm living in DC, and, none of my friends want to do anything because they're all scared. So it was just like a really, so I moved to Florida at the end of 2020 and have been in South Florida ever since, and, really like it here. And, so that was kind of my journey into like, red/orange pilling. And, the more, and I've written about this issue extensively, and, I found myself even looking at what I wrote about coronavirus hysteria. And like, even then in the early days, I was giving way too much credit to the people in charge. Like the amount of scams that they've been able to run over us has been impressive. And even like buying into these seemingly innocent narratives, I think was a mistake in the first place. So I think that a lot of us on the bright side, we learned a lot from this era about human nature and about, getting out in front of things and all of that. But I hope that answers your question, that long-winded answer.
No, it answers it very well. And it is interesting. Like on the one hand, well, it's easy to be labeled a conspiracy theorist just for even asking a question that's outside of the given stated narrative these days. But sometimes it's easy to think, well, God, like these damn bastards, like with this master plan that they're putting in motion. But then I'm like, you know what? But these fuckers aren't that smart. Mm-hmm. But then the other side of things is like, wow, but like we can barely, coordinate a orderly withdrawal of troops from a foreign land. And that's like just the military you're working with. But how did like every global government and like every state government somehow in the US manage to coordinate this fairly uniform response to the COVID crisis, where like I can't think of a time when the world leaders, those in power, really quote came together like that. And of course, it was for let's say authoritarian reasons, but that was something that was kind of shocking. Was like, you want to think on the one hand there are these people pulling the strings. On the other hand, you think, God, but the puppets that whose strings they're pulling just all seem like completely hapless idiots. But then on the other hand, you're like, wow, this was a pretty coordinated response, and happened pretty quickly. And somehow we reached this consensus with a couple of outliers in terms of, internationally, but where all these countries just kind of were like, yep, this is what we have to do. Like, we have to adopt this totalitarian hand here, and that's the only way you'll be safe. And it kind of goes back to like this, like COVID was the perfect step in the permacrisis, I think, for anyone that has authoritarian leanings, like, because I feel like that's what we've been living through, at least, like I'm in my early 30s as well. It's just like this constant, this permacrisis where you go from, we can go back to like 9/11 if we want to, like a horrific and terrible attack, but one which was also used as an excuse to not only invade many other countries, massively expand the military industrial complex, and hugely enrich defense contractors, but then also to institute things like the Patriot Act. And then you go into like, okay, great financial crisis. Like, and there were probably a couple of crises in between there. But then you go into that and you see a whole lot of other new rules and regulations come up. And then you get into like, I don't know if the next part of the crisis, which was like for a lot of people, Trump, like, oh my God, Orange Man's so bad. Like I'm no Trump fan. I think the guy's a jackass. But the response of so many people on the left, like truly becoming hysterical about him as though he was just this antichrist. I was like, we're blowing some things a little bit out of proportion here, guys. And then you go from, okay, finally Trump is out of office, and like we still heard about, he still takes up so much of the news cycle, which is just astounding. Like I think the media realized like, wow, this is just a cash cow we can keep on milking, like keep Trump in the news. But then we had the war, COVID, the war in Ukraine. And now it's like, okay, we're starting to shift that permacrisis narrative towards the climate crisis again, which is always kind of an underlying narrative there. And it's like, first of all, the media loves a permacrisis because they make money. Like they need to run news to make money, right? The government loves a permacrisis because with every new iteration of it, they find a new way that they're able to clamp down a little bit more. And then there's this weird group of people, which is shockingly large, who also seem to love the permacrisis because I think people, like, if there is not a lot of meaning in your life, you search for meaning. And in absence of any good source of meaning that you can give yourself, you want somebody else to hand it to you. And these types of people make whatever that particular crisis du jour is into part of their identity. And it's become so integral to them that like they also become experts on the subject. Like all of the, the armchair doctors who were very, very certain that cloth masks would prevent this respiratory virus. And all of the people with, in the Western world with Ukraine flags in their bio that are suddenly like military experts. And, people talking about Ukraine and the Donbass region who literally just found out about it on Wikipedia yesterday. But like it becomes part of their identity. And then it's so hard to shake. And it's also so hard to ask questions about, because any questions you asked are not taken as just questions. They're attacks on that person's identity. And like, now I just wonder, like, what is the next permacrisis? Like, is it a combination of COVID lockdowns with like climate hysteria turning into climate lockdowns? Like, is that where we go next? Is that the, I guess, where do you see the evolution of the permacrisis going to next? And I guess put another way, what is the state's next excuse to try and remove more of our liberties from the individual?
Yeah, I think you're right that the current permacrisis map is basically flipping the channel between the climate hoax and COVID and trying to see which one's working better. It's hard to tell in Florida, but I hear stories from people that live in like major cities, and especially like New York, LA, Chicago, that a lot of people are remasking, which is just sad at this point. I think that these people should just be mocked and ridiculed. Like, I don't care if they have some type of thing going on. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, I have no empathy left for these people. But it's what I fear is that, because I think that, like, these crises have an expiration date. You see it with Ukraine now, that it's really a hard sell. And we talked about, like, the depravity of the ruling class. Now you had this awful wildfire in Maui, and there's barely any federal resources getting over there, weeks after the game. And they're in Congress now. They know that they're going to struggle to have votes to pass the Biden administration's $24 billion additional dollars for Ukraine, because it's becoming deeply unpopular. So what they want to do is they want to tie the Maui funding to the Ukraine funding so that everyone votes for it. And it's like an out for the people that are the fence sitters, so they can't so their constituents can't be mad at them. So it's just kind of goes to show, it's a good example of like what goes on in our halls of power, like the moral degeneracy. But I think what I fear with the next step of the permacrisis is you're going to have like these type of I don't know if you want to categorize them as like false flag events, but this whole idea of like a cyber pandemic, like purposeful destruction if things go south. And although I want to see, I'm looking forward to, I think, an inevitable era of like hyper Bitcoinization, because our inflationary fiat bubble is eventually going to pop. But I think on the way down, or on the way when these people start to retreat from the chaos, they will have to impose some type of sabotage to get away. So that's what I think is to look out for, like some type of very weird situation. But I think that at the very least, this COVID era has made lots of people skeptical of government force. So I would be on the lookout for something like that to happen. This type of major incident throughout the United States. Unfortunately, these people really have no shame at all, and a very limited moral compass, and they just like don't really care about their fellow citizens whatsoever. If you go back to like the foundations of the Federal Reserve and U.S. monetary policy in the last 100 years, it boils down to I don't want to sound like socialist, but it is true that our economic system is basically robbing the vast majority of people through monetary policy to enrich the elites. And that's been working for a very long time. And I think technology has, there's been some amazing innovations over the past few decades that have helped to kind of like bail out the elites and kind of extend their timeline of power, because quality of life has definitely increased, especially in the United States. But there's coming a point in time when the bill is due, and they don't want to pay the bill; they want us to pay the bill. So that's when things get kind of dicey. And I think we're going through that era right now. They need to pay off all of these lobbyists, all of these industries. The military-industrial regime, they're hungry again. 1 year of Ukraine or 1.5 years of Ukraine just isn't going to do it for them. They want another Afghanistan. So it should be interesting to see how things play out. We already pharma got paid, so I think pharma's taken care of for a while. But there's all these industries of the elites that are going to want to get their chunk of change too. So we'll see what happens.
It's so interesting because you said, like, I don't want to sound like a socialist, but you made a very valid critique. It's funny because like we tend to think in these very like binary terms of like, okay, the general assumption right now, if you listen to actual socialists, not because you're obviously not a socialist, but if you listen to actual socialists, they will refer to what we have now as capitalism, right?
Yes, like
Um,
hyper capitalism.
right.
I
But like
wish.
what we have now is like not capitalist at all. Like it's a kleptocracy run by a gerontocratic oligarchy. Um, and it's just so funny because it's like, you know, people always say, or well, the socialists, you know, oh, real socialism's never been tried, or real communism's never been tried. It's like, fuck, man, real capitalism has never been tried. Like
Hmm.
you, because you've always had the state. I mean, how can you possibly call something a capitalist system when you have the state doling out massive, massive subsidies and picking the winners and losers and giving contracts to their friends and freaking, I mean, not even to get into the insider trading. Like, wow, I'm glad Nancy Pelosi was able to retire as the number one trader, like of congressional history. I mean, really just hats off to her. But it's just so funny because it's like, uh, yes, our the parts of our system that are capitalist have enabled us to, as you correctly identified, achieve a massive improvement in the standard of living, and those good parts of capitalism, or I should say, the parts that are actually capitalistic of our system, have lifted up the majority of the world out of poverty. It's it's one of the safest, most peaceful time to be alive, right? Like
Hmm.
that being said, you have this massive state apparatus at the national level and the international level, which is just sucking actually so much air out of that system, like so much of the productivity. Jeff Booth talks about this in his book, The Price of Tomorrow. Like technology is naturally deflationary. Everything should be getting more affordable for us. And then you'll always have the fiat economists who say, like, well, but look at the price of flat screen TVs. Like they're getting cheaper. It's like, okay, thank you for that, that one example. Meanwhile, everything else is getting more and more expensive, more and more, out of reach. If we're talking about things like home ownership, you used to be able to have one parent working, usually the husband, and that parent was able to support his whole household with two or three or five kids on one salary without working three other side jobs, uh, by just saving, being relatively frugal, but still having a great standard of living and being able to own a house and then pay it off. And now we're at this point where I think a lot of the kind of black pill energy that's out there, especially in some of these like the folks younger than us, like that are coming up right now, coming into the workforce, they're realizing, oh shit, I thought I was getting paid a lot. Like this new, this job I have out of college is paying me well, but I'm never going to be able to afford to buy a house like my parents have. It's just not
Hmm.
possible. And so I think that's when you start to see like that apathy, that hopelessness, I think leads more people towards this hyper leftist mentality of, well, then I just want it given to me. And I'm not saying that everyone is the case. There are many, many hardworking people in every single generation. It's not a generational thing. It's just a societal thing where we're at in this cycle of growth and decline, of boom and bust, which is it's not a bug of the fiat system. It's a feature, right? And so it's interesting because I think you're right. The bill's coming due. I mean, look at the national debt, look at the interest on the national debt, look at how much that is just like going up exponentially. At a certain point, like something's got to give. Luckily,
Hmm.
not luckily for everyone else, but luckily if you're an American, like the U.S. is still, it's still, number one. Like the U.S. dollar is still the world's reserve currency for now. And like it or not, everything else will break before the dollar does. Like it's the prettiest horse at the glue factory. It's not, it's
Hmm.
still at the glue factory, but like so many other currencies are going to collapse long before the dollar does. So at least we've got a little extra cushion, but that also sucks if you're not in in America. Like we've done this for a long time, just exporting our debt and our inflation to the rest of the world to somewhat mask things at home. And I mean, it's a good thing our military is so massive and the military industrial complex is well fed, because if that wasn't the case, we'd probably see other countries push back a lot harder. And that's why our military is so big, right?
Yeah, well, I think speaking of that, we're kind of entering this for the first time since probably the end of World War II, we're entering this multipolar environment where you have other players, specifically China, but there's others that are like seemingly ready to contest the global hegemony of the United States. I hear things about like this BRICS currency and whatnot. And BRICS just stands for it's just this coalition of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But it seems that all these countries share a very similar mentality. So it's just like a race to become the best fiat. It's like I don't know. Do you buy into any of this stuff that they're suddenly going to create like gold backed or Bitcoin backed national currencies? Like I just don't see that panning out, because, especially like in an alliance, because you have all kinds of interests there. I hope at least that the future is just Bitcoin, and that they're like I just don't see like any type of like intermediate term fiat that's going to supersede the dollar. I don't know. What's your take on that?
No, it's an interesting question, because like you see a lot of people in the financial media who are like, BRICS is what is really going to destabilize the dollar and dethrone it. But then a lot of people, are also saying, oh, and it's going to be backed by, a basket of currencies, a basket of their currencies, right? And then maybe also have gold reserves backing it. But it's like, you really think that Russia and China and India and Brazil and all of them, and the plus countries, however many of those, are really going to give each other the green light to go in and audit each other's reserves of gold? Because that's what's going to be required if they want to actually back it by gold, right? Like, I know all those
or they could
countries.
scam people. They could always scam
Exactly.
people and just say that they have this amount of gold and trust me, bro. Right?
Well, and that's what they would have to do, because like, we know that like China and Russia, as they're let's say a wary friend with each other, right?
Hmm.
But obviously they're still watching their own backs. But I find it hard to believe that they would really open up their books essentially to be like, yep, we can promise we have this much gold, and you can come here and audit it every 2 years to be able to see. Like, that being said, I think we have a lot of things that are uh, kind of reaching this confluence at the same time, right? Like, you've got this very obvious changing of the guard happening in so many countries around the world, where the gerontocracy, which has, I mean, look at a guy like Joe Biden. He's been in politics for over 50 years, like in some capacity. I mean, like conveniently, entered politics right around, in the early 70s. Like, what the fuck happened in 1971? This whole political class was entering politics, at least in America, where they're very old, was entering politics in that early 70s or maybe early 80s era. They've been in power in moving up that ladder since then. But at a certain point, we all die, right? Like, and as long as some of these people seem to live like improbably long, I'm like, seriously, how is it that some of the worst people, like, how is Kissinger, like, outside of the technical, but like, how is Kissinger
He's
still alive?
100
Like,
now.
I know, and
He's
I'm like,
100 years old.
how are you still alive, dude? Like, but the point being, we've got this whole political class, and that has been around for forever, decades and decades, longer than most of us in the younger generation have been on this earth. They've been in politics, but at a certain point, they will die off, right? And what I'm curious about is like, what fills that vacuum? Because like, clearly there's a lot of power grabs happening in sort of this last ditch effort to retain as much power as possible until have like, literally, we've got walking zombies like Dianne Feinstein. It was like what are you doing? Like, you are just run by your handlers, and a lot of them are, right? But who then fills that power vacuum in terms of actual leadership? Like, and especially as
Right.
we go into these next few election years, let's say, presidential election next year. But then, there's always another election. You can always count on that, right? Like, what happens to that power vacuum? Who fills it? Is it the young people that are in office right now? Like, let's say on the left, the AOC type people, Ilhan Omar. Do we see that class move into those even more high-powered positions, or do we start to see just kind of a rejection of the incumbent political class, regardless of age, and start to see a new wave of people become interested in politics because they say, you know what, I'm sick of this and it's not working. And even though you're a young person in politics, you're still more, you were working with the old guard. You're still just more of the same. Like, where do you see that heading? Like, who fills that vacuum and what comes next?
It's a great question because I spent, I think, 8 years in Washington D.C. and you don't really realize when you're in there. You don't realize the extent to which everyone is kind of trapped by the Uniparty once they enter Washington. My background's in foreign affairs and U.S. foreign policy, and what you find is that like there's not much of a difference really between these think tank operations, whether they support conservative or liberal candidates. The policies are very similar, and it's basically just all about enriching the industry that supports them. So I think that if you're a political leader today, the best thing you can do is to get people away from DC and spend as much time outside of DC as possible. There's a lot of interesting institutions that have kind of like unique ideas that don't have to do with empowering the DC ruling class, and almost all of them are based outside of Washington D.C. And I don't think that's a coincidence. A lot of things happen there that just corrupt all of these legislators, and it's hard to be optimistic for especially people that are trying to change things on the federal level, whether they are the president of the United States running the administrative state or some of it, or you're a congressman or a senator. You have very limited mobility. As much as we like someone like a Congressman Thomas Massey, there's only so few of them in DC. Basically, there maybe you can make a case that out of the 535 members of Congress, there's like 15 of them that are kind of cool and have interesting ideas. I think there's like one or two established like Bitcoiners. You have Cynthia Lummis, who I think is actually like well read on Bitcoin and would maybe consider herself a Bitcoiner. And then you have Warren Davidson, who's a congressman who's like half crypto, half Bitcoin, but at least he's talking about Bitcoin. So I think that like when it comes to, I'm much more optimistic about kind of like things like what happened in Florida, where you just have more local power to make change in your community. It's very tough on the federal level. But of course, as you know, the problem is that as much as our Bill of Rights and Constitution grants powers to the states through the federalist system, the money printer is controlled by these very centralized federal institutions. The power, the states have no power to spool up the money printer. So again, Bitcoin fixes this, but right. There's only so many things we can do in our politics without breaking the money printer. So I think that's ultimately the goal at the end of the day.
No, I think that's really well said. It's like we sound very repetitive and cliched oftentimes as Bitcoiners. Fix the money, fix the world. Like, but there's truth to that. There's a whole lot of truth, because so many things, you see people on both sides of the aisle. This is not exclusive to Republicans or to Democrats, but depending on usually if the opposition party is in power, the other side likes to complain about the state of things. Like, that's just how it works in this Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola democracy that we have. Is okay, when your guy's in power, everything's great, and when the other guy's in power, everything sucks. And the reality is that it's like, the Uniparty is much more pervasive than people realize. But more so than that, it's that because the money is so broken, there's only so many changes that any individual in the executive branch can make. Like, sure, they can sign a whole lot of executive orders, but as we all know, those executive orders tend to be things that are more of those, I don't want to say superficial issues, but they tend to be the kind of the ones that get their base riled up, right? And supporting them. Like, it's the whatever the hot topic of the day is that everybody's really fighting about. But those hot topics of the day are typically meant to distract people from the fact that, again, our money is broken. Like, you are losing purchasing power every year. And as much as there are supposed to be checks and balances in our, in our system, there's not really any checks and balances on the creation of the money, which is ultimately at the heart of all of it. And so it's frustrating sometimes when you see people who are, on the left complaining that, okay, it's usually on the left, it's, wealth inequality and why doesn't the rich pay their fair share, just to throw out some generic talking points there. And on the right, typically more you see, inflation and prices. You see more talk about the Federal Reserve on the right. I think it's safe to say that, but it's a little bit misplaced because people are talking about the symptoms and blaming those symptoms on the opposition party versus talking about the disease itself, which they either are ignoring or don't know about. And they also don't know about any potential cures like Bitcoin. And now Bitcoin doesn't fix everything, but it certainly does provide an escape route for people who are willing to learn about it. But I'm curious, because you, I think, have probably still a pretty large circle of people who are very deeply ingrained in, let's say, the political sphere. That's safe to say. And I'm curious how many of them are really, orange pilled. Where do you hear a lot of talk about Bitcoin as it relates to monetary policy, or is Bitcoin still kind of seen as operating in a vacuum from the people who are more, let's say, politically focused versus monetarily focused, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Bitcoin policy seems to only interest people in the political world during a bull run. So it's like, it was so fascinating because I talk about Bitcoin a lot on Twitter and I have a politically engaged audience. And I would get, when Bitcoin was making its run to 68, 69,000, and I was inundated with messages about, how do I buy Bitcoin? What exchange should I use? What wallet should I use? All the starter pack questions. But when we're in a bear market compared to, the Bitcoin's fiat exchange rate, it's like silence. And when I talk to influential people about this, they're like, yeah, I know that's the solution, but we need like a stopgap measure. And I was like, all right, fine. But the second, you turn on your, you log into your favorite Bitcoin price app and there's, an 8% green candle, then suddenly everyone's interested again. I think it has a lot to do with like this like human market psychology that it makes sense why so many people struggle to save and increase their purchasing power, because like everyone says they want to buy the bottom and sell the top, but for whatever reason during Bitcoin cycles, and like I said, I believe that there's no exchange rate at which spending $1 to buy Bitcoin is a bad price, especially nowadays. But it's just, for whatever reason, there's always more interest. And I'm sure like you've been through a few Bitcoin cycles now too. But yeah, it's the same with the political class. Like, when Bitcoin is at over 60,000 US dollars per Bitcoin, there's so much interest. People want to bring me on their podcast. Let's talk about Bitcoin. And when it goes down a little bit and perhaps they had finally decided to throw some money in, they are not happy with me. And, they think Bitcoin is a CIA op. And, a lot of people, I think there's a lot of laziness, not just in, I think, DC world, but just people don't want to do their own research. They want to be told what to do. They for good reason, lots of people don't believe in anything anymore because they've been lied to by the people in charge, and they're very skeptical about everything. And of course, this also applies to Bitcoin. But to defeat that, you could read about Bitcoin and come to a basic level understanding that you can't just hack the whole protocol and steal all of the money. So it's just I wish, but for whatever reason, it's very difficult to educate people on Bitcoin. But I think during the next bull market, it is a great time to capitalize on that as much as we can, get some real sound policy measures in place, because there's just nothing you can do to get people, you can point them to the rabbit hole, but they need to physically enter it, if that makes sense. It's just whatever. I'm not some kind of master at convincing people to do stuff anyway. So perhaps if you have any ideas to, you've done a great job orange pilling a lot of people with a lot of you and Carla's great Bitcoin content and work, but it's just from the policy and politics world, these people are only interested, as you kind of said, it's kind of like when the TV turns on and they're talking about Bitcoin, they're interested in Bitcoin. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
No, it's so true. And it's a tricky thing too, because I've got friends on all sides of the political spectrum. I don't, give a shit what your politics are. If I like you as a human being, and I don't want to reduce you to your politics. And I like that, because then I get to actually hear things from my friends that are completely just on either side of the aisle. And, strangely, you hear when it comes to lack of understanding, that's where people on both sides of the aisle find common ground, right? When you see, there are a lot of anti-Bitcoin people on both sides of the aisle. There are a lot of pro-Bitcoin people on both sides of the aisle. There are a lot of pro-Bitcoin people who find themselves, I think the more you go down that rabbit hole, the more you start to realize the extent of the Uniparty to a certain extent. You start to realize the prevalence of the state and the pervasiveness of different means of control that exist within this state apparatus. And, hearing things, it is really funny. You still that we're early, because you still hear the most cliched possible anti-Bitcoin things from people who really all they know is what they saw on 30-second hit on the TV, or they read in the New York Times or whatever else. And it's on the left, it's typically, oh, this is something that's bad for the environment, and of course they haven't looked into mining Bitcoin with flared gas or anything like that. They haven't looked into load balancing the grid. They don't know about any of that stuff. They just know what the headline said. They probably didn't even read the whole article. And on the right, maybe you get a little bit more, I think you get this from both sides though, of the kind of either the Donald Trump type view of, well, I don't like anything that goes against the US dollar. Yeah. Or it's used by criminals, or just the same old regurgitated talking points. But it's always very clear, with those types of people on either side, whenever I hear those really just basic and the same talking points I've heard 1,000 times before, it's a great opportunity to turn it back to the problems that person has with society in general. That they've got a grievance. And it's not that they don't like Bitcoin. It's just that they honestly don't understand it, and they're trying not to come off as stupid. They just are. So many people are really terrified of saying, you know what, I actually don't know that much. Can I ask some questions? Some people are great. I appreciate that, because that's how you learn. But a lot of people, I think, in this day and age, it's no one wants to appear stupid or uninformed, because they have all the resources to do infinite hours of research onto any given topic. So, but it's always easier to regurgitate a couple sound bites, pretend like you kind of know what you're talking about, and then go back to your cozy existence of living in your box and looking at the world through your red and blue blinders and blaming the other party when things don't go your way. But what gives me, I think the orange pill is a bit of a white pill in a lot of ways, because it really does give you some hope, because you see, like, you go to a Bitcoin conference and you see the diversity of people. And I'm not talking about like the bullshit kind of diversity. Like, I'm not talking about diversity quotas. I'm talking about like actual diversity of people from all over the world, from all different backgrounds, who have been brought together by Bitcoin and who are trying to build tools to maximize our human liberty and prosperity. And that's like something that's really heartening. So like, it's easy to get black pilled and be like, you know what, God, we're so fucked. Like, so many people are just have their NPC blinders on. They've been programmed. They're going through the motions. We're fucked. But then you see, people who are the exact opposite of that, and who are not only like talking the talk, but they're walking the walk and actually building things. And I'm so grateful to developers who, especially open source devs, who are like, you know what, I'm just gonna, like, fuck it, I'm just gonna build it. Like, I want to see this thing and I'm just gonna build what this is. And I wish I had those kind of skills. I do not. So I use the skills that I do have. But
yeah, like I so much appreciate. I so much appreciate, especially those with technical expertise that are there's a lot of them that are working in Bitcoin when they could be working for Google or Apple, making a ton of money, being a corporate drone, having a nice, actually being able to afford a house, which is rare, and instead they're working on, they have like a grant and they're working on an important Bitcoin project. These people need to be recognized more often than they are. And, I get that some of them actually prefer the anonymity, which I even appreciate more. So it's very encouraging. Like that, I agree with you. Like, people, I think if they're on the fence about not even, if they just want to learn about Bitcoin, they should just come to a Bitcoin conference and check it out. Like, there's no better vibes than at a real like Bitcoin only event or conference or meetup. I mean, the best of people, obviously including you and Carla.
And it was a pleasure to get to meet you in the meet space in Miami. That was a good time. So I want to, I think, like, start to wrap things up. But one thing before we close out that I wanted to get your thoughts on was just, as we go into this next election cycle, now that we're kind of full on talking about Bitcoin here, as we go into this next election cycle, like we've seen, just speaking of Miami, at the Bitcoin conference down there, we saw both Vivek and RFK both come out and with some very pro-Bitcoin sentiments, both of them starting accepting campaign donations in Bitcoin. That's like a pretty huge moment for us to see this. And this is people, again, one on the right, one on the left. That's great. I like to see it. That's depoliticizing Bitcoin to a certain extent. Where do you see Bitcoin fitting into the narrative going into this next election cycle? As somebody who has, seen a few election cycles, being in the swamp, being in DC, like, how these narratives are spun. Do you think this is kind of the cycle where, because we're also going into the halving next year, like we've got a halving, we've got the election, we've got, probably an ongoing crisis or two that'll be spun up between now and then. Who knows? Maybe the same ones we have now. Who can say what the permacrisis will bring? But where do you see the narrative going as far as Bitcoin as part of the election cycle? I know DeSantis also came out on the Twitter space he did and was like, I'm pro Bitcoin. Like, so that's three, not fringe in any way, but mainstream candidates who are vocally pro Bitcoin. That's something that's never happened before. How does that start to change the narrative, not just around the politics of Bitcoin, so to speak, but the conversation around money in general? Like, does it give us maybe a more nuanced discussion in the debates than we usually get, which are so many times just superficial soundbite debates that are completely worthless?
Yeah, so I'm torn about this because I think that I think you're right to be critical of both sides. Which during the Trump presidency, especially during the COVID era, a lot of the inflationary stuff we're seeing today is due to passing those massive multi-trillion-dollar stimulus bills. But realistically, right now, the polls, at least if you believe some of them, Donald Trump's a huge front runner, and he's going to be having a conversation with Tucker Carlson Wednesday, I think at the same time when the debates are happening. So it's not even clear. I think we'll know because I don't think Trump is very good at staying on message, and he probably won't even entertain the idea that anything, he'll just say that the economy was great and Biden's causing inflation. Like, I think that's all we'll get from a guy like Trump. What would be interesting is if we see a real contender emerge on the GOP side that is willing to critique both sides. So we'll see if that happens. I think we'll know in the coming weeks if these debates can generate some energy for someone. Because right now Trump's like 40 points ahead, and I think that the politics black pill, I guess, which is could be turned into a humanity white pill, is that maybe we'll see Joe Biden and Donald Trump debating, and people will just be like, "Oh my God, they're both the problem," right? So you're going to see two. Trump's going to be almost 80, if he gets the nomination as debating Biden. Biden will be completely senile by then. And imagine those two yelling at each other about who's to blame for America's economic woes. Maybe that'll be our route to Americans discovering the fact that the money is broken, more Americans at least. So I think maybe they'll let us in on the secret without intending to. But for sure, with these debates, if there's an established contender, there's certainly an opening to target the economic policies that have led to our eggs becoming the next gold. So we'll see.
Do you think? Because I did see that Trump was going to be not engaging in the debate, which kind of he and Biden are going by the same playbook here of I'm not going to. From Biden's side, he's like, well, I'm the president. I'm not debating RFK or anyone else. And Trump's side is just like, no, like he's doing his own thing, right? But I would hope, because Tucker is somebody who is definitely on the road to being orange pilled. I think he has I've heard that in personal interactions with him, like he's very curious about Bitcoin. He asks a lot of the right questions, not superficial ones, but deeper ones. And he's a guy who I think has become very disillusioned with establishment media and the establishment in general, more so recently as he's kind of completely stepped out of that role or was pushed out of that role, however it went down. Do you think there's any chance that Tucker actually kind of pushes Trump on listen, your administration was overseeing the Treasury and the Federal Reserve during the time where all of this massive amount of money was printed for these stimulus packages. And, does that conversation come around to Bitcoin in any sense? Or do you think it's going to go more boilerplate, and where we're going to see the actual action is, okay, in these smaller debates where neither Biden nor Trump are present, and we've got both Republicans and Democrats, debating each other in their pods, is that where we're going to kind of see the real action happening?
It will be interesting to see. I know that before Tucker was silenced and kicked out of Fox News, he had done a couple segments and had mentioned Bitcoin.
He interviewed Bukele. That was huge.
Yeah, and he seems very, I think you're right, he seems very open to the idea that he should further explore monetary policy, and he had all the right questions. The thing is, with Trump, he has yet to really grill him on anything. So I think that we'll see if we watch the interview. We'll see immediately if he's how he sets the tone, because there's also this idea that I've heard floating around, which is just rumors, that he feels the need to kind of be on side with Trump because he views him as the eventual nominee. And, Trump is a very sensitive guy, so he doesn't want to, lose access. But I think that hopefully Tucker will be tough with him and do the American people's service and at least hold him accountable for some stuff. But I think we'll definitely see early on, because Tucker's really his own man. So, I hope that he goes for it, because, the American people deserve transparency from both sides, from both people that want to be president. Yeah. But yeah, I think we'll see it immediately. But yeah, I think you're right that it's just, it's inevitable that, you can only, even if people are running on this, endless fiat treadmill all day, they're going to just start asking more and more basic questions about why they can't afford anything, why they need to take out, a loan to pay for their new TV over, an 8-year payment plan period. So I think that these questions will inevitably surface, and, then Bitcoin wins. But we can definitely accelerate adoption if people in positions to do so can at least help us on this mission a little bit.
All right. I mean, at least we see there's no doubt that the Overton window is shifting, and it's shifting in a good direction, where Bitcoin is not just this fringe thing anymore. Bitcoin is something that presidential candidates in the US are talking about. And it's something that presidential candidates around the world are talking about. Down in Argentina, this is something that is no longer just a small subset of people. This is fully in the mainstream dialogue. I would hope, just back to Tucker and Trump, I would love to see Tucker ask Trump about that fucking god-awful NFT collection scam that Trump ran. My God, but I highly doubt, as you said, Tucker probably wants to toe the line, have Trump back on, keep those views flowing. So he probably won't be like, what the fuck was up with that NFT collection, man? But maybe a guy can dream, right? Well, before we close up, is there, first of all, thank you, because this has been a pleasure talking with you. Great to get your insights, and just for the audience to learn more about you as a human being and also a Bitcoiner. Where should people go to find you so that they can check out your work? Feel free to pump anything that you want in terms of the newsletter or your Twitter to all the massive audience of the Bitcoin podcast, growing by the day. But yeah, where should people go to find you?
No, I so much appreciate you having me on, and it's gonna be huge. Undoubtedly, you'll have explosive growth if you don't get banned from every platform by the end of the year. But no, I think it's gonna be awesome, and I so much appreciate. It was a great conversation. To read all my latest work, you just go to dossier.today. That's kind of where all of my non-shit posting goes. I'm also on Twitter, just at Jordan Schachtel. No spaces. But yeah, appreciate it. Good conversation as always.
Absolutely. I'll link all of your stuff in the show notes as well, so people can find it if they don't know how to spell Dossier. You don't need to be embarrassed out there, people. It's okay. But thanks so much. So at this point, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for this episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. Bitcoin podcasts are abundant, but Bitcoin is scarce. So thanks for joining in to listen to this one. And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you're interested in sponsoring the Bitcoin Podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net. You can find me on Nostr by going to primal.net/Walker. If you want to follow the Bitcoin Podcast on Twitter, go to @TitcoinPodcast and @WalkerAmerica. You can also find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com/@WalkerAmerica and @WalkerAmerica on Rumble. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million, but Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to another fucking Bitcoin podcast. Until next time, stay free.